But welcome.
Thanks, no problem.
So we host a fellowship with our local SVP chapter. And we realized that one of the items that's always missing when we are providing leadership skills, helping leaders of nonprofits build capacity, is the importance and value of them understanding their ecosystem. And so that's kind of what this whole session is about. And we actually are building on sessions. So each one will kind of help lead you or guide you in your nonprofit journey. So Leslie, I'll turn this to you. What do you think are three things you should know about your local ecosystem before you either start a nonprofit or as you're trying to reevaluate the status of your nonprofit?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important parts of preparing to start or modify your nonprofit. I think everyone comes to this table with the right heart and what they consider to be a brilliant idea. And I don't diminish anyone's idea. I'm sure the ideas are brilliant. What I do know, though, is ideas are often duplicitous. There are often other people that have said brilliant idea or something that is a very close relative. So first and foremost, I think you have to define what's local to you. Are you trying to serve a neighborhood? Are you trying to serve a city? Are you trying to serve a county, a state, the country? You have to know what your footprint is going to look like. It doesn't mean your footprint can't change over time, but if you're starting, what do you want your footprint to look like? And then if you're changing, what do you want your footprint to look like, right? Do you want it to be larger or smaller? And both are okay, but you have to define what local is to you. So that's number one. Number two, I think that you need to do a deep dive into what are the other people. Hello, Kathy, welcome. Oh, she's probably still getting to audio, sorry. And I just want to acknowledge, Lad, you're in Houston, working as a chief technology officer in a startup, focused on supporting decentralized governance. Oh, cool. Plan to have a for-profit and nonprofit division long-term. Love that. Okay, so back to where we are, the three things we should know about our local ecosystem. One, what's local? Define that. Two, who is doing what you are doing or a very close relationship to what you are doing? I hear all the time, but my thing is different. My idea is unique. If I had a nickel for every time I had heard that, I would be a very, very wealthy woman, very wealthy. And I'm not. So what I will say is that please don't let your ego get in the way. Allow yourself the room to explore and understand what other people are doing. If you're in technology, what's the big picture of technology look like where you are? I talk with my hands, so sorry about that if that's distracting to anyone. If you are in healthcare, what's the hospital system look like? What does private health look like? What does public health look like? Understand what you're diving into. Let me use an example of this. In this fellowship that Nisi is referring to, we'll get onto the resources for sure. We have this big introduction at the beginning, and the very first day of this last session, 3 people got up and said almost the exact same thing. And I almost fell off my chair because I did not perceive that in their applications. We might have encouraged them from the beginning to let's think about what a merger looks like. And we're still talking to them about how does this work? Because there are other bigger institutions doing very similar things. Okay. And then the third point is what Nisi has here. What are the resources available to you within your system? Know where your partners are, because it doesn't mean they're competition. It means that they're like allies. They believe in what you're doing because they're doing something like it, or they're doing something that's related to it that could help you, or they always be willing to ask for advice. So those are the three things: define local, know who's doing what in a related category in your community, and make friends with them. Don't think about them as competitors.
Awesome. I always try to use the analogy because I think a lot of times in business, we think competition like right off the bat, right? There's a lot of opportunity to collaborate. So I always use a deli as an example, right? So when we think about a deli, we think about, a good old sub sandwich. It's not that you can't get the sub sandwich someplace else, right? That would be the competition. The collaboration would be, who are you getting your cheese from? Who are you getting your produce from? Are you baking your own bread? If you're baking your own bread, are you getting your own ingredients, or are you purchasing the bread and having it delivered? So just think about the things that you do and how you process your nonprofit and the spokes of your nonprofit and how it fits or complements other businesses that are not competitive with exactly what you do, but actually complement what you do, right? So if I own a deli shop, one of the things that complements my deli shop is working with the best producer of cheese, right? So I want to make sure that I am aware of not just who is the best producer of cheese, but who else is producing cheese in my ecosystem, because I want to know that when I start to sell my sandwiches, I can say we have top quality. So for example, I'm thinking about, Lad, what you're doing with your startup and kind of decentralizing that governance. There's a lot of spokes in there that can be complementary, whether it's, like storefront facing places, like event places, tech places that you can collaborate with to provide training, education, awareness, or it is actually software organizations that will complement what it is that you're doing. So not in competition, but still part of your ecosystem that is really important for you to know about and be aware of. Leslie, I'll turn this one over to you. Who is doing what I am doing, and can we collaborate? It's kind of what we just talked about, but if we were being specific, what would we say to someone in that space?
Exactly. So the who is doing what I'm doing, you've got to remember that when you start a nonprofit, it's not about the starting, it's about the sustaining. So you start a project with great enthusiasm and drive and energy, and but the long haul is hard work, really hard work. And that's why we sort of say this: don't start a nonprofit. It's not that we don't love nonprofits. We do, but we want people to be successful in the long term and not just fade quietly into the sunset. It's a crowded field. There's 1.54 million nonprofits in the US today. 1.5 million. That's a lot of nonprofits. And the majority of them are tiny, tiny. So think about what your scope is. So I don't mean to get off this topic. Who is doing what I am doing? So it's also important to look in the for-profit space, because there may be corporate businesses, because remember, a nonprofit is a business. The word nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business model. You are a business. So what for-profit businesses might be related, what governmental agencies might be related, what non-governmental nonprofit organizations might be related. So understand who's doing what, that you are a part of a structure. I think Nisi's point about who do you get the cheese from, who do you get the bread from, is a great one, because who doesn't like a sandwich? But it is also important for you to realize that you are not going to be able to do everything. So you want to have referral sources out and referral sources in. You want to have places that you, for the things that you can't do or the things that you decide you don't want to do. I work with a lot of nonprofit consultants, and I work collaboratively with them. Sometimes I hand things off. People call me and say, wonderful, thanks, lad. Jonathan, who just joined. Let me pause a minute. Welcome, Jonathan. We're glad to have you. And then Kathy, I want to acknowledge that you're here. If you want to drop in the chat where you're from, what your job is, what the name of your organization. We're happy to have you all. And we're sorry if there was a bit of a glitch signing on. We're not 100% sure what happened, but we'll figure it out. But we're glad you're here. Anyhow, okay. Can we collaborate? The answer is always yes. There is very rarely a time that I have seen that you can't have collaborating relationships with like organizations or completely different organizations. There will be people that are doing not what you do that you will, so they're doing something completely different, but you may need them for something. It is either you want to understand what they're doing, you want to refer clients, you want them to refer clients to you, you want to understand their expertise. Please, if you're going to do this, or if you are already doing this, make sure you see the ecosystem in which you exist as a collaborative force, not as a competitive force. I know I'm repeating myself, but I really want to drive that point home. We do too much on the competition, and that's not the best. Thank you. Oh, Kathy, great. You're here from Hope Tutoring too. Wonderful. We love this. Again, my apologies for my crazy voice. So how do we maximize the current ecosystem? It is all about being willing to reach out, pick up the phone, send a quick email, go to networking events. If you have, in San Antonio, we have an organization called the Nonprofit Council. I know that there are like organizations all over. Join it. Pardon me. I'm going to have a cough drop. Join it, go as someone's guest initially. If there's social venture partners in your community, get involved, understand what they can do for you. There are all kinds of nonprofit groups that can help you be the best you, help your organization be the best organization. The Nonprofit Council, thanks, Nisi. Those are the links there. So understand that most people want to help you. If you start a nonprofit, you're probably a fairly helpful person anyhow. I have never had someone call me that I've said, no, I'm not going to talk to you. Never. And I've been doing this for a dang long time. I'm always happy to say, what are you doing? How can we be of assistance? So here's a good list. I'll pause. Nisi, you take over from here, wherever you want to go.
Yeah. So I'm certain that the party club that you were at last night still has your voice.
That's it. That's it. It was at a big rager.
Yep. But I know you were partying. I know that's what it's from. So I'll take on this one. So here's some things, take away, great screenshot for you to have, but you'll also get this in the follow-up email. What is your community needs assessment? Figure out what's missing. So you may have started off doing one thing and then decided, okay, that's not where the need is, or that's not what we have the capacity to do. I'll give a quick example. When I first started teaching CPR as a nurse, I thought, I'm obviously just going to teach to other nurses. But what happens is they get certified and they're good for 2 or 3 years and I don't see them. And so that wasn't a really great idea because most nurses can get the certification through their employment. And so it was just, it was like, oh, well, that's not going to be a great thing. I stumbled across a mom who was also a nurse, but she was also a Girl Scout leader. And she said, hey, do you do any type of CPR, first aid, babysitting training for Girl Scouts? And so running the business that I was like, sure, absolutely. And that became what my business did. We traveled up and down the East Coast for 2 years teaching CPR, first aid, and babysitting training to Girl Scouts. And so being flexible and understanding that what you think you're going to do and what your community needs could be two different things, and understanding how to kind of change those gears. And then identifying those available resources. Sometimes I think we slow down when we label ourselves as a nonprofit from joining other business-focused groups, and that absolutely should not be the case. So if there are local chambers that you want to participate in, or other entrepreneurial, groups, networking groups, join them because they can still use your services. Don't feel like you have to only do service-based to service-based, work. Like Leslie said, it is a tax status. It does not mean you don't have a full business. I'll step down to that evidence-based intervention. So it's really important to make sure that you're not just guessing what should work, and really pull some data behind your initiative and your effort. Understand, okay, I think I want to do this, but there's 18 other businesses in my region doing the exact same thing. And here's a success rate of those businesses. Are they struggling? Are they doing well? Is there space for me? Does my region have the capacity for another one of us, right? And use your data to pull that information, So if you are tutoring, what about what you do and how you do it makes it unique to afford another tutor in that space, right? Figure out what that looks like for you. And then engage. It's very, very easy to put yourself in a silo once you start a nonprofit, because you're just kind of tunnel visioned, focused on what it is that's happening in your business, getting it up and running and started, making sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. But what happens is you forget that people do business with people. And you've got to be out there building relationships, making connections, networking events before you even get started, because that's a great way to figure out what people want, right? So if I'm engaging and I'm networking in my community, I can figure out what people want by those conversations. This is where those bright ideas come in. We're like, oh, you know what? Maybe we should offer these things, because every time I talk to somebody, here's the feedback that I get. Or maybe the tagline or hook or the thing that you thought was going to make you unique isn't the thing that vibes with the people that are actually going to pay for your services. So just being available to be engaged and don't bury yourself in a silo are all really critical components of that. And so how do I build those relationships? We talked about the Nonprofit Council. Social Venture Partners has chapters in pretty much every metropolitan area. You can join your local chambers. BNIs also have it. There are also a ton of coalitions. If you have a funding coalition in your region or area. But again, don't treat it like I can only network with other nonprofit organizations. Network with all types of spaces. If you are in, if you are tutoring, then what you should be doing is networking with teachers associations, stay-at-home moms. Are you in Facebook groups for homeschooling? Think outside of the box sometimes, like where are your clients going to be at? Are your customers going to be at? If you're trying to move more into government contracts, are you in communication with your local, SBA or SCORE? Have you connected with those individuals? Are you certified in whatever you need to be certified? think about those spaces as well as what, you know, when you're trying to build those relationships in your ecosystem. I think people kind of stumble when they think nonprofit, like we have to be pigeonholed into one thing versus another. So, and I will turn this one over to you, Leslie. How do I identify opportunities for collaboration and enhance my programs and services? You're on mute. We forgot our shirts that say, sorry, I'm on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I have a dog and I'm always terrified that he's just going to start barking, and you don't need to hear that. Anyhow, so identifying opportunities for collaboration and enhance my programs and services. It start with the questions. Are you addressing the same need or issue that I'm looking for? I'm looking at serving? Do we serve a similar geography, as I said in the beginning? You have to remember, I'm just going to follow up on something Nisi just says. It doesn't really have to do with this slide, but does the issue that you're concerned with interest enough people that you can be governed? Can you recruit a board, funded, and have clients? I use the example of green dogs all the time. If you only want to save green dogs, are there enough green dogs that need to be saved? And are there enough people that want to give you money for green dogs? And are there enough people that care about sitting on a board? But that does lead into this, because the collaboration comes from identifying those people that do care about the same things that you care for. Always have a team. Doing this work alone is never advisable. You're going to drown, and it's not going to be fun. If you have people that are as excited about what you're doing or want to do as you are, then you'll be able to build this collaborative picture from the beginning, right? And if you start from a position of limited bandwidth, that's going to be your habit. And that is another way people get burnt out. So you want to be effective. You want to know who the subject matter experts are in all the areas that you need to run this nonprofit. It is not just who's doing the work that I'm doing, saving the green dogs. It's who knows how to do my books. Maybe you're not an accountant. Make sure you know how to be compliant in the finance arena, how to submit your taxes. People say, well, I'm a nonprofit, I don't have to pay taxes. Oh, but you do. You have to submit a 990. And if you're making sales, I'm not a CPA, so I'm not going to get into that, but you need strong accounting and financial advice. So it isn't just about who loves green dogs. It's about who is going to help you build your platform from which you're going to help the green dogs. So make sure that everything you look at has that collaborative opportunity for you. It's also a good idea to think about, how do you partner? Because if you look at funders love to see agencies that come together to do things collaboratively and cooperatively, rather than each doing something independently that is really probably related. And is there strength in numbers? Very often there is. It certainly presents a strength to potential funders. If you look at number 6, create a partnership agreement. So make sure, if you are working collaboratively, you work out those kinks in advance. Understand who's going to do what. If there's expenses involved, who's going to handle that? If there's revenue involved, how's that going to benefit? Make sure you understand how to handle challenges that come up. Things will come up. Everyone doesn't like to do things the same way. You have to have that delineated before you start down the path. It is often the demise of organizations when they begin collaborative approaches and then the expectations are not laid out properly. it derails very, very quickly.
Yeah. I would agree. I like to touch back on what you talked about with the funding. I think that because we think it's a good idea, to save those green dogs, we think that everybody will think that it's a good idea. And when you are starting a nonprofit, unless you are going the route of like crowdfunding or crowdsourcing those funds, you're going to need funders or investors to pour into your organization. And it looks so much better for you as a nonprofit if you have collaborations. You only know those collaborations exist if you understand your ecosystem, right? So I think about like, with tutoring, if I am trying to build a tutoring nonprofit organization, who else would be a beautiful collaboration where funders would say, okay, if you're working with these people, then I know that you're going to be more sustainable as opposed to trying to do it by yourself, right? And this goes for all sizes of nonprofits. I think a lot of times we think smaller nonprofits have to work together, but many large nonprofits collaborate. They create MOUs, these partnership agreements, and they put it into their grant response, right? When they're asking for funding, they include these agreements that they're going to partner with other organizations that are doing similar work that have better reach, right? So whether you're partnering to do virtual tutoring and you're partnering with Zoom, or you're partnering, TechSoup has a little Wi-Fi hotspot component that they're offering. If you're doing virtual tutoring, can you tap into those resources, letting your funders know it's not just me and 2 or 3 good people that are trying to save these dogs, but we have a whole collaborative initiative and effort within our region to do this work to be sustainable. But you have to, in order to do that, you have to know who's in that space with you, that you can collaborate with, how you're going to collaborate with them, who's going to do what in that agreement strategy, that partner strategy. And this is also a great space to say, where are my weaknesses? What is it that I don't have the bandwidth to do? If it's just kind of one of me and a board that kind of is not fully engaged, I need to collaborate with organizations that have more people resources, right? If it's supply resources or space resources, or am I collaborating with local school districts because I'm in a virtual office, right? I'm at home and I need to have virtual space in schools to be more appealing. So kind of think about the things that are your weaknesses, because that can lead you to understanding who you should be working with to collaborate and not compete with.
I'm going to give you a real world experience. I used to work for the American Red Cross here in San Antonio. Then I worked for the National American Red Cross. But the local Red Cross in San Antonio has a partnership with the food bank, because when we go out to fires or we have shelters, we need food, we need snacks, we need water, the Red Cross is not a food purveyor. It doesn't have that kind of storage. So the local food bank and the American Red Cross made an MOU that says, we will store the food you need. We will always have it fresh and rotated. So whenever you're ready, you come get it, and we'll use it as you see fit, depending on the kind of response you're having. So that's a great opportunity for an organization to work together, find the best solution, not see this other big organization as a competitor, but as an ally and a collaborator. So we've talked a lot about the research, knowing, the knowledge of the ecosystem for fundraising. So we talked about ask the right questions from the beginning, right? And then you get to the point of gathering a team, because if you're doing this by yourself, not so good. You're just going to be lonely, and then it's not fun. But it's really important to develop that roadmap to understand where are you going with all of this. So if you've asked the questions, you start to understand the ecosystem, You built a team that helps you with everything from accounting to operations to program development to communications. I always say to people, if you're not telling your story, no message, no money. You have to tell your story to deliver the money. So, why is the ecosystem important for fundraising? You have to be able to tell potential fundraisers, how are you different? How are you similar? How are you collaborating? How are you making the ecosystem better? We probably don't need another animal shelter. What we need is better animal shelters because we need better fostering, better adoption. We want to make sure there's not these roaming animals on the street that have to be euthanized. Nobody wants that. So it's getting to the root problem of things and understanding how are you contributing to that in what already exists. So it's understanding that real vision of your organization's potential and how to include donors. Donors are your lifeblood in so many ways. It is about, and remember always, it is about them. How do they fit into your ecosystem? And it is about what is their interests, what are their connections, what is their real core drive? Do they want to be a big donor and help you really succeed? Do they want to be an annual donor? Or do they want to volunteer as well as being a donor? Is engagement important to them? And define what engagement looks like. But there's also the just advice. People that are in the community from which you are, to which you are serving, and from which you are gaining resources, ask questions of them too. Do you see others in this work? Do you see others that are doing it well? Do you see others that are in a related field doing it well? Do you see others not doing it well? Because you want to know who's messing up so you don't mess up. You want to know who's really doing it well so you have that North Star to say, this is where I want to go. You have to be clear on all the things that you think about when you have to be clear on your mission. You can't be all things to all people. Be clear on what your lane is. What's your vision? What is your outcome? What's the ultimate goal? It's that there would be no green dogs euthanized. Great. Can you get there? Well, the mission says we are going to do X, Y, and Z. So someday there are no green dogs euthanized. Every green dog has a home.
I think it's also important to, note that, back to what Leslie was saying, we might have the greatest intentions of saving all the green dogs, but it might be of better value to your ecosystem if what you do is create fabricated dog cages or leashes or something of that nature. So you're not taking on the big thing of saving all the green dogs, but you are part of the ecosystem that is just as critical of a component, because now you can save green dogs and blue dogs and yellow dogs, and you know what I mean, as opposed to just the green ones. And you build your ecosystem based off of what it is that you can actually do, what you have the capacity to do. I also sometimes, when we're thinking about, regrouping our nonprofit, I think a lot of times, our attendees are either people that have been in the nonprofit and they need to regroup, or they are starting out and they're realizing that it's this massive elephant that they're trying to consume. And so some of the things we want you guys to kind of keep in mind when you're creating this ecosystem, and it literally should be, it might be digital for some. I go old school, piece of paper on the wall and sticky notes. Who's in my area that's doing what I'm doing? Who can compliment me? But it also needs to include who can fund me, who can make me sustainable, How do I reach them? How do I network with them? Am I doing outreach events? Am I going to tech, conferences? Am I presenting webinars or trainings? Am I providing goodies in a goodie bag for a luncheon? Like, what does it look like to reach the people that can sustain you? Because even if you have revenue coming in, a good portion of that revenue will come from donors. It will come from donors, and donors don't have to look like just an individual. It can also look like an organization, a government contract. This is why we say people do business with people. So make sure that you are engaged in your spaces, in your ecosystem, not just with people that you can collaborate with, but people that could be potential funders or donors for you as well. Definitely want you to understand the value of applying for grants. I will say this, I'm not a grant writer professional, but I've participated in tons of grants being written. And the ones that typically win are the ones that are very clear about what we're doing, the ones that are very clear about how we're collaborating with different other groups, organizations, nonprofits, and the ones that we can very successfully say, here's how we're going to be sustainable because here's what we've done so far. And I think that you have to consider what that will look like when you do a nonprofit 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, how that funding needs to be impacted. And if the world changes, how will your funding and your ecosystem change? Will you go from receiving mostly government contracts and to individual, or vice versa? So the importance of understanding the funders, the donors, and having a good solid donor stewardship plan is really just as important as knowing who you're going to collaborate with your nonprofit, because that's what's going to make you sustainable. So this slide it's called a funding landscape analysis, and you can just kind of Google. There's metrics. I'll probably drop one in the email that we send out to everyone, and this just gives you an idea of who the funders are in your ecosystem, right? Where are they at? What zip code are they in? What professions are they in? How do I find them? I will say most, that might be too generous, but most donor databases have some sort of mechanism within that database. It might be an upgrade where it will help you find who's in your landscape. This is important to know because, again, you're engaging with your community. Community is people. People do business with people. You want to know who you're talking to. If you are trying to offer tutoring services in a demographic or zip code that does not have a lot of representation of needing tutors, you want to know where you need to be at. Don't spend all of your time in one area because it feels good. Really take that data and understand what it is to build out your ecosystem successfully. All right, I'll give this one to you.
Yep. It is important as you look at your ecosystem, and we use this word frequently because it is the right word, because everything is relational. It feeds off of each other. No one really works in a silo. So it is important for you to understand what's available to you out there and what isn't available to you out there. If you're not focused on an unmet need, as an example, if you're focused on a need that the community perceives as being met, go back to the animal shelters. What is it that you're seeing that is pulling at you? What is the unmet need? So maybe it is just that we need to work on building the dog foster system or animal foster system, or we need to develop a better way to spay and neuter. I'm just obviously making these things up, but it is important to understand that you need to be focused on unmet needs, not duplicating a met need. So that's where your constraints are going to start to show. And you need to listen to the people that are doing the funding, talk to grant makers, talk to foundations in your community that are heavily engaged in solving the issues of your community. They understand the ecosystem very, very well. This is a great slide. Love this. So understand this is your roadmap, right? So we talked about in this ecosystem and planning phase, it is start with the questions, gather a team, but then you develop this roadmap. Understand your mission and vision. Understand your staffing needs. You cannot do it all by yourself. You have to be able to say, okay, I need one person to do programming. I need one person to do operations. I need one person to do fundraising. When you start and say, I can do this all myself, you're going to make a very big mistake. You also have to put all the ducks in a row, right? You have to develop a budget and a resource plan. This is all this organizational capacities. You have to understand how to manage your books. You can't manage what you can't measure. And if you're not measuring your money, you don't know how to manage your money. You have to have a record keeping system. You have to know who are your donors, who are your clients, who are your partners. It can start off as an Excel spreadsheet. It does not have to be, or a Google spreadsheet or whatever system you use. You don't have to go out and buy Razor's Edge. I would strongly encourage you not to do that. You might want to get Salesforce for nonprofits. There's lots of tools out there, but you can start with the basics. Every bell and whistle does not have to be your initial starting point. I would rather you have the people than the things. And then it is all about the why, which is your idea. This is your mission, but it's also about the how, the what, the where, the when, and the who, right? It is why will the organization exist? That's the number one. What unmet need are you filling in your community? The how is, what are you going to do to fill that unmet need? Maybe there is something that's not happening in the ecosystem, and you want to find out what that thing is, and that's what you're going to focus on. How will you do it differently from others in the same field? How will you, what will be the core activities? Both Nisi and I have this experience of we see people trying to do all things for all people. And I can't stress enough, pick a lane and keep your lane narrow. Once you have that lane sewn up and you feel like, yep, I have the people to do it, this is humming, you can make the 1-lane highway a 2-lane highway, but don't start out with a 6-lane highway. Way too much to manage, way too much to start small and build. Don't start huge and then have to shrink. That doesn't feel good. And then the how will we fund it is the most important part of the sustainability model that you should be looking at all day, every day. Lad, you said something about you want a for-profit and a not-for-profit, and that I'm assuming one's going to feed into the other, and that sounds like a great plan. But there's lots of different ways to get to this. It's just making sure that you go into this with your eyes wide open. And it goes back to how we started. Are you starting a nonprofit, or are you thinking about retooling your nonprofit? Asking the right questions, digging deep. Don't be afraid to uncover. Lift up the rock, see what's underneath it. You might find something that's going to disappoint you. In other words, you might find that what your initial idea was is not exactly what's needed in the community. That is okay. It is better to find it out at the research stage than when you've already filed your 501c3, you've already filed with your Secretary of State, you've already got this thing out there, the train is moving, and then you've got to stop the train and say, wait, let's back this up, pull this back into the station. That's hard to do. Doing the work up front is not as hard as backing that train up into the station again.
Completely agree. I think that a lot of times what we do is we systematize the process of how we're going to get started, and we create this kind of waterfall system, meaning we do one big chunk of it before we go into the next phase of it. But what happens is it doesn't allow for the flexibility that you really need when you're starting or you're planning or readjusting your nonprofit. And so we always say, be really agile with it, right? Kind of get all the things going at the same time, a little bit, right? So you can make those adjustments as needed, as opposed to creating, this huge phase one and getting all these things done. And then you go into phase two and realizing everything that we just did in phase one is of no use to us now because we didn't take the time to really test it out, see if it works, celebrate those successes. I know when nonprofits get their status, a lot of times they're excited, but I'm like, this is a really big thing because some that apply don't get that status. And so celebrate the successes all along the way, no matter how big or small they happen to be. I just want, to let you know that we want to open this up. If you have any questions, the more specific, the better. I'm actually going to stop the recording so you don't feel like your business is going to be all in the street. Just give me 1 second. People are like, I'm not going to ask.
And there's probably not a question that you